What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. I'm really enjoying making these kinds of videos where I talk about like a specific champion design concept or maybe a mechanic, and then really go super in depth on the topic and give you guys some of the insights champion developers use to create the characters we all know and love, and I'm hoping you guys like them too. Today we're looking at what is probably the most important concept when it comes to making champions. And I'm excited for this one because I get to use a lot of the info from Daniel Klein, who you guys might know as one of the head champion designers at Riot Games, who was the lead designer of the new upcoming champion, Taliyah. This mechanic is so important that without it, a champion just isn't themselves anymore. It's really what makes a champion what it is, and it's a massive part about what makes them fun to play. And that mechanic I'm talking about has this big fancy word for it called viscerality. And if you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, hit that dislike, and let's get started. Now, viscerality is kind of a buzzword here that I'll be using throughout the video, but it's a good name to give the idea of really just how something feels. Especially when it comes to mechanics, viscerality is the word used to describe a measure of how good that mechanic feels to play with and use on your champion. And it's a big part of what makes a champion just feel good. It's essentially what makes their abilities satisfying, and is probably the biggest influence on what makes someone just straight up fun to play. Without it, a champion just wouldn't be themselves. Viscerality in a character comes almost entirely from good communication. And what I mean by that is the information that is shown inside the game displayed to the actual player. This type of thing typically involves something revolving around how a certain ability is presented. You have first the audio aspect, like big, chunky, and satisfying sounds. Take for example something like Zed's ultimate. That ability has fantastic viscerality, because hearing that pop sound at the end of his ultimate, oh man, that's just so satisfying. There's also the visual aspect too. Really snappy animations, crystal clear particle effects especially contribute to viscerality by giving the player an awesome animation when an ability finally lands. Something like Jace's EQ combo feels really good to land because it has this huge explodey animation on someone when you hit them finally, and you get to see their health just chunk. And those visuals and audio effects are something that really makes that champion, or I guess every champion, come together. And it's a massive part of designing a champion that you might not really think about initially. It doesn't really have an effect on balance or numbers, but you'd be surprised. Making a champion feel better to play, making them more fun to play, not only makes them a lot more popular, it also makes them just better champions and can honestly contribute to increases in win rate. It's hard to play well on someone that you don't enjoy playing. Another thing that viscerality comes from that definitely goes underappreciated is additional elements that get added into an ability. A lot of abilities have extra elements that make them borderline, if not very much overloaded in a sense, and oftentimes it seems like those extra elements are kind of just like randomly slapped in there for no reason at all. Well, a lot of those things are put in for the purpose of making that ability feel better, to make it have better viscerality. A lot of big hit abilities have like a follow-up slow, where sure, the ability really doesn't need that slow after, but that follow-up slow serves as like a function of sort of a hit confirmation and makes hitting that ability feel really good. An example of this is something like maybe Cho'Gath's Rupture, who probably doesn't really need the slow on his area of effect knockup, but having that on the ability makes it a lot more satisfying to land, and as a result it does kind of become an important aspect, despite not entirely making sense balance-wise. And to give you guys a little bit more perspective, we have Daniel Klein, who commented on the whole concept of viscerality, and mentioned that when he's designing mechanics, this viscerality concept is taken hugely into account, and is one of the most important parts of design. They try to push the boundaries of spells and test what he described as the balancing parameters. You know, things like how fast can this movement ability actually be? How short and snappy of a wind-up animation can I get away with? How much of this ability can I front load to make landing it feel extra awesome? It's the stuff like that that designers really take into consideration when creating mechanics for an ability, and it's potentially maybe even the most important aspect to creating those abilities. I mentioned this a lot in other videos where I talked about scrapped abilities, but half the time when I say an ability gets scrapped, it's because it just didn't feel good. and that means that they just weren't able to get the viscerality to be as good as it needed to be with that type of ability without having it be too insane balance-wise. And viscerality very much influences the balance of abilities actually. A lot of things get toned down, or maybe some elements of a kit might get taken away in exchange for adding extra viscerality elements on another aspect of the character. It's a really interesting thing to design for, since although it doesn't directly influence how fights play out, it really does influence how champions play in the game. And there's quite a few champions today who many might consider in need of a rework, but in actuality they might just be lacking in the viscerality department, and as a result appear to be a lot worse than they actually are. And this is probably the biggest explanation I can give for when I say a champion is, outdated. Like when I say someone like Singed is kind of an outdated champion, a big part of the reason as to why he's outdated isn't really because his kit sucks. In fact, Singed's kit is pretty damn awesome. It's super unique, it's well designed, it's super interactive, and it's just kind of cool. Singed is outdated because his abilities just don't feel that good. He doesn't feel the polish that makes a champion really click. Like his ultimate's kind of just this passive ability that really doesn't even feel that good to use, since a passive aura effect is very difficult to make satisfying to play with, and a lot of the other abilities lack what you might expect from an ability that has well-designed viscerality on it. And viscerality becomes a problem within a champion when a powerful ability like Singed's ultimate, or maybe Janna's attack damage bonus on her shield, are just undersold in a sense, and it's really hard to do that with passive effects. One example of a design that is taking place the actual instant that I'm making this video, that is being designed almost entirely around the concept of improving viscerality that I very much agree with that design, is some of the experimental changes to Sona that were taking place on the PBE. Sona, similar to Singed, is a great example of a champion who lacks viscerality in her design, since all of her basic abilities are very aura and passive focused, and it's pretty much impossible to make a passive buff feel as satisfying as landing some explosive ability that has a meaningful impact. She definitely has some cool aspects like flash ulting people, just like how Singed has some really cool aspects too, but a lot of her gameplay moments as a whole aren't entirely that satisfying. To try and counteract that, Riot Gypsy Lord, a head champion designer, is testing some Sona changes on the PBE that involve making her auras a lot more selfish and meaningful for a shorter amount of time, especially her E, which at the moment is probably the biggest offender in her kit of lacking viscerality. It's being changed to give Sona a massive but kind of short speed boost that will allow her to not always have to flash to land a good ultimate on someone. And ultimately these changes are just with the focus of making her feel better to play without really changing how strong she is. It's interesting to see how they'll play out and how they might even improve her win rate overall, despite potentially being maybe a power neutral change or even a nerf, because they are taking away some elements of her kit in exchange. And I'm definitely keeping my eye on that Sona experiment on the PBE, and I think it has a lot of potential. Okay, I guess I've kind of rambled on a lot about this concept, but it's something that I do think is really awesome to think about, and it definitely has a huge influence on the champions we play all the time. I mentioned a lot of examples in this video, but what do you think are some examples of viscerality done right? Or maybe examples where it could have been a little bit better? Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed my ramble here about this topic. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.